Hello everyone, my name is Vanya, and my presentation on bilingual education throughout the years starts with 1948 and ends with 1982. Um, for my first slide, I wanted to include this photo, which is not included in my timeline. It was before, which is in 1928, but I wanted to include it because I thought it was really neat. When I came across it, it's a 1928 class photo of a Mexican American school in Cotulla, Texas. And in the center, you can see their teacher, who at the time was Lyndon B. Johnson. And I thought that was really cool when I came across it. I was reading about the work that he did with them, where he talked about how poor they were, where they had to, or there were times where he saw students digging through garbage to find anything to eat. He would buy them equipment for physical education, and he actually returned to that same school to speak 38 years later after he was a teacher there to speak for Education Week. And he was president when he returned to speak at the school. For the beginning of my timeline, I started with 1948, which is Delgado versus Bastrop Independent School District. And this is a case where Mexican American attorney Gus Garcia filed a lawsuit against Bastrop Independent School District, and he did it on behalf of Minerva Delgado and 20 other Mexican American parents. The suit claimed that the segregation of Mexican children from white races was illegal, and they accused the district of not providing the children with the same facilities and the same instructions as white children. Attorneys for these parents argued that the school districts were prohibiting their children from attending schools with the white children. The court ruled that the segregation of the students was indeed illegal because it did violate their 14th Amendment rights. Once they did integrate to the same school, the court still allowed a separate class for those students who did not speak English, but it was for first grade only. My next slide is on the 1954 case of Brown versus Board of Education. This is where Oliver Brown filed suit against the Board of Education when his daughter was denied admission to a white elementary school. He claimed that the schools for Black children were not equal to the schools for white children and violated the 14th Amendment. So this is a little similar to the one against Bastrop ISD. And in May 1954, the court ruled that segregating elementary and secondary students by race was unconstitutional. The next slide is 1964, Laredo United Consolidated School District. And with this, it started with Superintendent Harold Brantley. Here in Texas, he launched the first bilingual program in Texas, and he was actually inspired by the first bilingual program in the nation that started in Dade County, Florida. So that's what inspired him to start the first bilingual program here in Texas. He first initiated the program with first graders, but then he expanded it to second and third grade. And with this program, it was significant because Spanish-speaking children were able to be taught in their native language. So they first started with receiving instruction in their native language. They then transitioned to 30 minutes a day in Spanish, and with English instruction the rest of the day. Once this was implemented, there were other school districts that followed with implementing bilingual education program, and those schools were in San Antonio, McAllen, Edgewood, San Marcos, Harlandale, Zapata del Rio, Edinburgh, Bandera, El Paso, La Joya, Mission, Corpus Christi, and Del Valle school districts. By May 1969, Texas had 16 school districts with bilingual programs, and they were serving 10,003 students. Next is 1968, Title VII of the Elementary and Secondary Act, which is also known as the Bilingual Education Act. And this was introduced by Texas Senator Ralph Yarborough in 1967. And with this, the Bilingual Education Act, it recognized the needs of students with limited English in the United States. So they provided federal funds to train the teachers with the skills they needed to teach our bilingual students. It also promoted greater access to the curriculum, and it implemented ESL and bilingual programs, which was a big achievement. The legislation was signed into law by President Lyndon B. Johnson on January 2nd, 1968. Next is Diana versus State Board of Education, 1970. I also included the names of two other cases that are similar to this case. The book that I read had these three cases combined, but I believe the one that's most known is the first one, Diana versus State Board of Education, 1970. The other two are Covarrubias versus San Diego Unified School District and Guadalupe versus Temp Elementary. So with these cases, they brought changes in minority students being promoted to the next grade level. And with the cases, they found that the IQ assessments that were given to Mexican American students were unfair, because these assessments were given in a language that the students did not understand. So they were given in English, and the students weren't able to understand the questions. Therefore, they were being scored low. And because of those low scores, they were wrongfully placed in, at the time they were called EMR classes for the mentally retarded. They were placed in EMR classes and programs. And with the case, students were, the schools were required to retest the students in their native language, which showed that their scores went up once they did that. Next is 1973 Bilingual Education and Training Act. And this was signed into law by Governor Dolph Briscoe on June 3rd, 1973. And this was really significant because with the law, it mandated all Texas elementary public schools to provide bilingual education to children of limited English. So as a previous slide I had where superintendent implemented his own bilingual education programs into his school district. This one actually required all school districts to provide bilingual education. This law was also significant because prior to it, Mexican Americans were punished by the no Spanish rule. And that's where, as we saw in the documentary, for this class, any students that were caught speaking Spanish were punished and disciplined. Mexican American students were welcomed in Texas schools. Prior to this, they were always welcome, but their native language and culture was not accepted. Children were segregated, forced to learn English, had run-down facilities and equipment, and taught by underpaid, ill-trained teachers. Next is 1973 San Antonio Independent School District versus Rodriguez. And with this case, parents of Mexican-American parents filed a suit against San Antonio ISD and 6 other surrounding districts. And with this case, parents claimed that their children of poor families, were at a disadvantage on the funds that the schools were receiving because of the Texas school funding system that relies on property taxes, which is something that unfortunately we still see today, where there's schools that receive a lot more funding because of the Texas school funding system that has to do with the property taxes. Parents claim that the system favored the more affluent because children of wealthier districts receive more money per student. Parents claim that this violated the equal protection requirements. The Supreme Court unfortunately ruled that education is not a fundamental constitutional right, and it did not violate the 14th Amendment. Next is 1974, Lau versus Nichols. This was the case against the San Francisco Unified School District, who had 2,900 non-English speaking students of Chinese ancestry. There were some students who were provided supplemental classes, but there were many more that were not receiving those supplemental classes in English. And those students filed suit claiming that the district was violating their 14th Amendment rights. The court stated that by providing students with the same facilities and curriculum did not constitute equal treatment because these students did not speak English and they were not receiving a meaningful education. So then the U.S. Supreme Court ruled in their favor, and they stated that by placing students with little or no English in a mainstream English classroom was a violation of their civil rights. And my last slide is on the 1982 case of Plyer versus Doe. In 1975, Texas legislators were allowing school districts to deny undocumented foreign-born children from enrolling in their schools. In June 1982, the Supreme Court ruled that states cannot constitutionally deny free public education to students based on their immigration status. So this was also really big, significant, big case for our students. The court stated that by denying the children a basic education, we deny them the ability to live within the structure of our civic institutions and foreclose any realistic possibility that they will contribute in even the smallest way to the progress of our nation. The court also stated that the children should not be held accountable or punished by the actions of their parents. And this is a picture of one of the families that was represented in this case. This young man right here in the white shirt, he was one of the students that was represented in the case in the case of Plyer versus Doe. And these are my resources.